On today's edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast, if the Knicks could get out of the Eastern Conference, would they actually be a threat to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA Finals? We explore that and much more with Locked On Thunder's Rylan Stiles.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to the New York Knicks. My name is Gavin Schall. I'm a credentialed media member that's been covering the New York Knicks for nearly a decade in the Saturday coast of the Locked On NBA podcast. This is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks. Give you those detailed insight on your favorite team 5 whole days a week. So be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team. Guys, I want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Football season is closer than you think, and right now new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel app to get started. Guys, on today's show, as mentioned, I am lucky enough to be joined by my Locked On NBA co-host, Rylan Stiles, who also hosts the Locked On Thunder podcast, to talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think this might be the most important of any of the team previews we do this entire offseason because Oklahoma City is the ultimate threat. If the Knicks get out of the East, I still think it is more likely than not the Thunder will be the team that is ultimately standing in their way. So with Rylan, we explore if Oklahoma City is actually going to be even better this season after having one of the best regular seasons in league history. Are the Knicks the Thunder's biggest threat, or are there bigger threats out west for Oklahoma City and even in the East, according to Rylan? And how did the Knicks match up with the Thunder? What were the areas the Knicks found some limited success against Oklahoma City last year? Will they still work with Chet Holmgren and Alex Caruso back in the lineup for Oklahoma City? We explore all that and so much more right now with Rylan. All right, guys, as promised, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Rylan Stiles, the host of the Locked On Thunder podcast, and more importantly for me specifically, the co-host of Locked On NBA on Saturday nights with yours truly. So if you enjoy this one, be sure to check us out on Saturday nights covering the NBA at large. Rylan, how's your summer been as NBA champs? Right? I don't know. Do they give parades to the podcasters too? Like what's been going on in Oklahoma City?
Yeah, we were at the parades. Obviously, it was a bigger deal whenever Chet and Shea strolled by than it was for us podcasters, but it was still fun to be a part of. Obviously, the summer is a bit shorter whenever you play deep into June, but I can't wait for basketball to be back.
Hey, man, this is a podcast I was fantasizing about us doing in June. I was ready to come to Oklahoma City for a game. I'm sure I would have been happy to give you a tour around New York. Unfortunately, those darn Hicks from Indiana spoiled it. It led to an absolutely incredible series, and belated congratulations for me. I think I gave you one on the Locked On NBA podcast, but on our own pods to the Oklahoma City Thunder for winning the title. I'm really curious where you put Oklahoma City coming into next season. It is pretty obvious to anyone who follows the NBA. They are fairly overwhelming favorites to win the NBA championship. I was curious your opinion on how overwhelming. Like, do you put them in a tier with the KD Warriors where there was just this sense of inevitability and just a substantial gap between them and the rest of the league, given the disillusion of the Celtics, given the injury to Halliburton, given that Cleveland hasn't really shown anything in the postseason? Or do you think there may be a step below that where they're clear-cut favorites, but there are other teams with realistic shots at a title?
Yeah, I think that they're a step below the KD Warriors of just, they're the clear-cut favorites to me. I think that they're going to be a popular pick to repeat as champions, and that's typically what we default to whenever previewing the next season. But their third option, for example, isn't as proven as those Warriors' third option was. Chet Holmgren has to prove the expectation level is warranted with what we all have. I mean, I think that the fact that we had Chet in the top 30 is pretty indicative of what we all think of his game. I mean, the fact that this guy's played a season and a half of basketball and still has a lot of room to grow offensively and has to take a step forward offensively for this team to repeat is a pretty good sign of how much we expect that to happen. But it actually has to come true. The Thunder actually have to shoot the ball better than they did a year ago. If they come in as the 13th out of 16 teams from beyond the arc again in the postseason, they're not going to repeat as champions. And you saw Denver got better. You saw Houston got better in the Western Conference. On top of, I think, the depth of the Western Conference, not elevating teams to the point where they can beat the Thunder, but the Thunder have been fortunate enough to sweep the first round of the last two round. The last 2 first rounds they played in,
Mhm.
they've swept them the last 2 seasons. The 8th seed this season in the West, again, barring injury and everything else, they should be able to take at least a game off like OKC. Every round should be very competitive. Let's say you do have to go through both Denver and Houston. Like those are 6-7 game series. And so whenever you get to that point in a series where it's the 6th or 7th game, anything can happen. Anything at all can happen in the NBA at that point with how talented those teams are. So if they were in the East, I would consider it being a overwhelming favorite.
Mhm.
Now that they're in the West, them being in the West with how competitive the West will be, I think that they're just clear cut favorites in that regard. But OKC has the deepest, most talented roster in the NBA. And if we're just going to predict things as we know them right now in September with what we know of who's healthy and who's not, then the Thunder are going to be NBA champions again. And we'll see if anyone can step up and get in their way.
Yeah, I did a little research before this, and by research I mean I found a Reddit post that had the preseason title odds from each of the Warriors' 3 championship seasons. So I think this was a consensus of all the sports books, but the Warriors in 16-17, that first KD year, were minus 128. 17-18, they were minus 187. 18-19, they were minus 168. So they were heavy favorites, but so is Oklahoma City. They're plus 210 this year to win the title. Cleveland all the way back at 650. Next teams, and this is from our friends over at FanDuel, Denver Nuggets at plus 900, Knicks at plus 950, Thunder at plus 1,000, Lakers at plus 1,500. So there is a substantial gap between Oklahoma City and everyone else, according to the sports books, just not quite to the same extent as those Warriors teams. I guess to that point, like, how long is the list of teams you think that could beat Oklahoma City in a series? And we're not talking about in, I guess, like the scenario where the Warriors actually lost, where a Kevin Durant tears his Achilles and a Klay Thompson tears his ACL. Like, barring catastrophic injuries, is the list 2 teams, 3 teams, 4 teams? And who is on that list? Is there a ranking in your mind? Like what does that look like in terms of genuine threats to Oklahoma City supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you were to rank them, you'd have to put Denver 1 because they have the earliest shot, and they also took the Thunder to 7 games a year ago. And Thunder fans can cope with that however they want to. Oh, that team was really young and not battle tested, and that was what grew them up as a core. But the facts are the Denver Nuggets had 5.5 playable players. 3 of them were dealing with some form of injury or illness, and they still took OKC to the brink of elimination. And yes, J-Dub had a torn ligament in his wrist, and yes, he had his worst ever game in Game 6 in Denver. But the facts remain the facts that the Thunder almost lost to Denver last year, and Denver got a lot better. They got worlds better than they were a year ago. And Denver had an excellent offseason to maximize all of their possible avenues to improve their roster, and they executed that perfectly. So Denver number 1, because you're going to see them earliest. Number 2, I would have Cleveland, because the Cleveland matchup, assuming that they get there, they'd be in the NBA Finals. They would have less bumps and bruises. If they're in the NBA Finals, you expect them to only have a long series with New York, and the rest of their series pretty academic at that point for New York. And Oklahoma City, you expect them to be tested in every single round, really, in the Western Conference. So, and then they'd be playing, the Thunder would be deep into June again after another 82-game season. And we've seen in the past of NBA history how hard that is to do, although it's not impossible because we're really in our first ever parity era in this league. But Cleveland has a good defense. I think Cleveland has a matchup with their double bigs that can mirror Oklahoma City and try to counteract Oklahoma City. But the Thunder, I think, have a more reliable postseason offense, as we talked about with Locked On Cavs on our show, Locked On Thunder, this week. So you can go see how we're crossing over Cleveland and OKC if that tickles your fancy there. But I do think that it's going to be Denver and then Cleveland, and then it's like 3.5 because I would combine Houston and New York. If things worked out perfectly on different spectrums for both teams, could you see the Thunder still not be able to shoot threes in the postseason, and thus that already great Rockets defense becomes even greater, and Kevin Durant is fully healthy, and he's just a menace to anyone, but in particular, a team like Oklahoma City, who has an elite level defense, but their defense has to play up underneath Kevin Durant, which he does not like, but he can, if he can get it right, could shoot over the top of them, get really hot, and then spray the ball around to guys like Jabari Smith Jr., etc. And then with New York, the reason why that they're so lower on this list and why they're kind of in that half team with Houston is because with New York, I respect the heck out of their top line rotation players, but their top line rotation players also present mismatches for Oklahoma City, where you're coming down the floor and you're picking on Jalen Brunson every single time. You're coming down the floor and you're picking on Karl-Anthony Towns every single time. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can change your coach. You can do whatever you want to, but you're going to have to play those guys. You can't bench them. Like they're your best players. And so the ability to have Oklahoma City exploit those mismatches on top of the ability of OKC to have a historically great defense to slow them down on the offensive end. And now you've reduced their efficiency on what they're best at, and you've heightened their deficiencies, what they're terrible at. You're able to come out on top of that series. But if the bright lights of New York are too big and the Knicks just put on this miracle season, similarly with the Pacers. I mean, the Pacers took OKC to 7 games with that double magic popping up in game 1 where they make that comeback in the second half, and with them playing at the absolute peak of their powers for the entire rotation. And then sadly, of course, the Therese Halliburton injury derailed them in game 7. Like New York could have that same kind of fairy tale run and be less tested in a positive way, of like less miles on them, hopefully, by the time they get to the finals, to where they're able to push this to 7 and into game 7. Anything can happen. So I would say that Houston and New York have the chance to go 7. And whenever you have a chance to go 7, you have a chance to win. Cleveland and Denver have a chance to win the series outright.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting debate between the Knicks and the Cavs. We just had an 82 game sample size last year where Cleveland was dramatically better than New York, and there wasn't really a comparison between the two teams. 4-0 against them in the regular season, a couple of those blowouts, and then you look at the playoffs, and there was just seemingly something missing there for Cleveland. I know it's a little bit unfair given the myriad of injuries they had, given that they just, as you know, as well as anyone, just ran into a buzzsaw in just the sheer magic of that Pacers team. And if the Knicks had that same matchup in the second round, they probably had the same result and lose in the second round. And maybe Cleveland could have gotten by Boston, but I think the Knicks showed something, 2 years ago in their grit, getting out of that first round series with Philly and giving Indiana everything they could despite a myriad of injuries. And last season beating Boston, who on paper was the team that was kind of best equipped to challenge the Thunder. That there is another level in this team in the postseason. I think Jalen Brunson is in that conversation with Shea, with Luka, with Nikola Jokic for just if final 4 minutes of a playoff game, which guy do you want handling the ball? Like, I think there is an argument for Brunson against anyone in the NBA. And for the Knicks, the question has just consistently been, can you get it to those last 4 minutes? And unfortunately against Indiana last year, they ran into Tyrese Halliburton, who had all the magic Jalen Brunson had and maybe some more. But I do think this Knicks team will be a little bit more well-equipped to do that in terms of how optimized they are under Mike Brown, and certainly superior depth to what they had last year. But we will get into that in just a sec here on both Locked On Knicks and Locked On Thunder. But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. I have to say that again because it's insane. $5, it wins $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Rylan, I'm not sure what professional team or what NFL team you're rooting for in Oklahoma City, but I know I have this issue in New York as a Giants fan. I don't have a lot of skin in the game on Sunday. We've not had an offensive line in nearly 15 years that is capable of protecting a quarterback. We've not had a quarterback that warrants a good offensive line in nearly 15 years. And so I'm in this purgatory where I don't really care that much about the team I like the most, except for when I use FanDuel and have a little bit of extra skin in the game. So if you want to juice your Sundays, be sure to check out our friends at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, what's up, guys? We're back crossing it over. Locked On Knicks, Locked On Thunder, a surefire preview of the 2025-26 NBA Finals. Don't tell Danny Cunningham over at Locked On Cavs I said that. I think your rankings are fair. I do think there's an argument to be made that the Knicks are a bigger threat than the Cavs, but there's just an overwhelming amount of data that Cleveland could be the better team. But I'm curious. I wanted to ask one more Thunder specific question before we dive totally into the Knicks Thunder matchup. And that is, you kind of hinted at the shooting earlier. You hinted at Chet's need to improve. Where do you think Oklahoma City was most vulnerable last year? And that they did go 7 with a very depleted Denver team. They did go 7 with an Indiana team that was fantastic, but didn't have a full strength Tyrese Halliburton, I believe, for the last 2.5, I guess, games of that series. Where were teams able to pick at them a little bit? And, you touched on this when you talked about the biggest threats to Oklahoma City. Would you put the Knicks in a category of a team that could pick on those specific weaknesses?
I mean, it comes down to what we see from New York defensively this season, because where the Thunder got in trouble was, we know that in the postseason, the game slows down, and even their historically great defense, which did create a lot of turnovers and transition opportunities, particularly in the first round and the Western Conference Finals against Memphis and Minnesota, they didn't have that exact success against Denver and against Indiana. And when they did, they blew them out. And whenever they didn't blow them out, it was because in the half court, the Thunder just stalled out because of their poor three-point shooting in the whole postseason, and because of the likes of like Chet Holmgren, who had an offensive postseason to forget, but a remarkable defensive postseason, which allowed them to still win games. And like without Chet's defense, you do not have an NBA championship this season for Oklahoma City. So it comes down to, can you stall out their half-court offense? Can you make them work really hard for buckets, get late into shot clocks, and not get high-quality looks? And that takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of playing on a string. It takes a lot of athleticism, frankly, because you have to clog the lane on guys like Shea and J-Dub, and then still be disciplined enough and talented enough to fly out and disrupt three-point shooters who they spread the ball out to, and have those three-point shooters miss. So the Thunder's lack of three-point shooting, which in turn helped bog down their half-court offense, really crushed them throughout the postseason in those losses and in those series in which they had to battle out. When you saw teams like Minnesota and Memphis not force the Thunder into half-court situations, you saw them get ran off the floor a few times in those series. So I do think that that's an area in which, because the Thunder haven't gone out and changed this roster, they have a 99% roster retention, and the only missing link is Dylan Jones, who was a non-factor of the entire season, and he's replaced by Thomas Sorber, who was the 15th overall pick but is out for the season with an ACL tear. So again, another non-factor for the Thunder for this current season. Long-term, of course, Sorber will be a good piece for them. The reason why you still hold that up is because there's nothing to point to of it being fixed immediately. What you're pointing to is Chet Holmgren being a better offensive weapon, which he was prior to that hip fracture. And the fact that he came back from that hip fracture within the same year and faster than even the Thunder's own timeline expected him to is a great sign. And the fact that he was back to that level of play defensively in the postseason is another great sign of like his mobility and athleticism still being there. But he's got to refine his technique offensively, being able to shoot the ball at a high clip from beyond the arc, being able to play off the catch and get to the rim. You need guys like Isaiah Joe to become better three-point shooters. Now, Isaiah Joe, that might hit your ear funny. He is a sharpshooter. NBA 2K does have him as a top 10 three-point shooter in the league. But how does he get those shots? Primarily as a stationary catch-and-shoot guy. And as you know, Gavin, in the postseason, it's easier to take away stationary guys. He's going to have to be better as a movement shooter. Cason Wallace is a guy that saw his three-point percentage regress last year. He's got to get back to where he was as a rookie. And all these things revolving around the scoring gravity of Shea, the scoring gravity of J-Dub, who took a leap in the postseason, even on a torn ligament in his wrist as a downhill scorer. Like, if those things happen, then you easily see a path for that to no longer be an issue for this Thunder team. But until you actually see it happen, you have to consider it still an issue. And for the Knicks' perspective, you just lost one of the best defensive minds in basketball with Tom Thibodeau being fired. Can you get this personnel to stall out the Thunder in the half court when you're in the finals? Hypothetically, you're playing Brunson and Cat all of the entire game except for maybe 3-5 minutes a night, and you give them that kind of release valve for how to manufacture buckets when things get tight in the half court by having both those guys on the floor. Can they put this thing together enough to where they can cause those problems to flare up for OKC to the extent that Denver did, to the extent that Indiana did?
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating question, and it kind of comes down in some ways to like how the Thunder are willing and also able to play in the half court. And we didn't get like a great sample size in the regular season because Oklahoma City, for both those games, the first 117-107 victory on January 4th, and then right around 10 days later, a 126-101 victory in game 2. That game 1 score a little bit deceptive. Oklahoma City outscoring the Knicks 25-10 over the final 6 minutes. That was, for the most part, a fantastic game until Shea just absolutely cooked them down the stretch. Game 2 was also deceptive as the Thunder were up 35 plus points in the first half of that one, and they could have named their score and won that game by 60 if they'd wanted to. And that was without, in either game, no Chet Holmgren, who, to your point, incredibly valuable to Oklahoma City. Their clear-cut third best player, and Alex Caruso, who I would argue is the fourth best player on the Thunder. And I'm curious what you think, like in a playoff setting, and maybe just gauging off how Oklahoma City played in the playoffs against other opponents, what their offensive approach would be against the New York Knicks, because the Knicks were able to slow down what I would argue is probably a more talented offensive team in the Boston Celtics. And they did so just by switching everything across the board and kind of daring Boston to beat them one-on-one. I don't know if that works as well against Oklahoma City, because I think just Shea is just a far better isolation player. And at times than Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who were not particularly efficient going at Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. I think it would be asking a lot more of Brunson and Towns to try to contain Shea in any meaningful way. That is issue number one. Issue number two, or not even issue number two, I guess my question coming out of this is, like, the Knicks at times tried to dare Indiana to do the same thing. And Indiana, unlike Boston, I think just played it a bit smarter and didn't take that bait and said, we are just going to keep running actions involving Brunson, involving Cat. When you try to go double big, we're going to force Mitchell Robinson and Cat together to cover a whole lot of ground. And even if that means Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard are running like a big, small pick and roll, like even if it's not our typical ball handlers, we're going to put your weakest defenders in multifaceted actions over and over again, force them to make multiple correct decisions, force them to fight through multiple screens. And inevitably, to your point, Brunson and Cat faltered. And it's why against the smartest offensive teams and the best offensive teams, I still have my doubts that the Knicks can guard them and contain them to the extent that they need to. And especially against Oklahoma City, you're not going to have the margin for error on the other end of the floor where you should score, or at least the Knicks should score 1 million points against the Indiana Pacers. It's not even saying that Indiana isn't a good defense, just that the Knicks at their best should be able to blitz like an average to solid defense. Oklahoma City obviously is going to hold the Knicks down, to your point. So the Knicks need to hold the Thunder down in turn. Do you think, one, that like Shea is capable of playing that style? And do you think Oklahoma City just collectively has the passing IQ to not just be like a good passing team, but a great passing team and play out of drawing two, swing into a great shot, not just once, but over and over and over again to exploit Brunson and Cat, I think, in the most effective way you can?
Yeah, and your points right there just prove why the Knicks were bumped down my list as a half team, because each way that the Knicks have tried this formula of getting their defense to be better against Boston and against Indiana, the Thunder are really good. Like the Thunder have better isolation scores, in my opinion, that you're going to see at the end of the season, and we saw in the finals and in the playoff run. Like, not only is Shea better as an isolation score than Boston's two guys, as an isolation score downhill, J-Dub's better as well. And like J-Dub was better in the finals than what you got the production from Boston's duo against New York in the playoffs before Tatum was hurt. So with that, like, they can do it that way. And they can also, how did they get out of a rut in Indiana? With their backs against the wall, they're staring down the barrel of a 3-1 deficit. And for as great as the Thunder were last year, they were not going to come back from down 3-1. Like, that is a really, really hard thing to do. That has almost been normalized because we've seen it happen a couple of times in recent history. They did it by Shea going off in the fourth, but how did he go off, Gavin? Because throughout the course of the game, when you look at the big picture, J-Dub was red hot as a scorer. And so they said, you know what? Let's have a guard-to-guard screen with Shea and J-Dub to get Shea on a weaker defender and take you off of your primary matchup for Shea. And now Shea cooks Nesmith, and now the Thunder have a 15-point quarter from Shea, and they have a win, and they've kind of avoided a disaster case scenario against Indiana. So those are a couple of ways where they can dissect New York. And then the point about playmakers. Since the day that Mark arrived in Oklahoma City and this new regime got here on the coaching staff, and then Sam was able to lay out a new plan as a total rebuild, stripping everything away from that first era of Thunder basketball, what they look for is versatile defenders and everybody having the ability to play make. And so the Thunder's playmaking ability, it is rooted in, frankly, simple reads of just these guys keep the ball moving so much that eventually you're going to have a lapse in your rotation. I think that only Isaiah Hartenstein on this team can make advanced passes and can really throw guys open. But when you're facing a New York defense, the fact that everyone is someone who you trust to make the right decision and just get the ball where it needs to go next, and we'll worry about what happens later, that in and of itself can break down New York's defense as well. And then you get into a situation where if you're playing, for example, Boston, another large reason why Boston lost to New York was because Mazzulla Ball of just these threes didn't go down and they didn't hit them, and you didn't have the ability to punish them in isolation with Tatum and Brown to the extent that the Thunder did. If the Thunder can become better from beyond the arc, and just become at a passable level on top of the added isolation scoring from Oklahoma City, they can pick apart that defensive strategy. And if the Thunder have a step forward from Cason Wallace, who we expect to be better and showed last season to be better on the ball than he was his rookie season. So if he continues to incrementally improve at that, now there's another guy where you can do some unconventional stuff like Indiana did of not having Shea or J-Dub initiate the pick and roll as a ball handler, but maybe having them as screeners, maybe having Chet as a screener and having those guys play off of ball. There's just all these different ways to where, because your defense includes two guys who are liabilities and the Thunder's lineups at any given point do not have enough liabilities offensively to hide them on, I don't see how New York can get away with Brunson and Cat on the floor at the same time defensively against Oklahoma City. And so that's going to be a big deal for them to try to figure out. And perhaps they can, but it's why I'm only giving them half credit for being able to beat Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I look back to that first game between the two teams, really on both ends of the floor, is the model for New York. I think given that the Knicks ultimately lost by 10 points, this is maybe a crazy thing to say, and it's a testament to just how much better Oklahoma City was than the rest of the NBA last season. I think the first half, and it maybe even go so far as the first three quarters, was about as well as the Knicks played all season in terms of halves of basketball. I would say the second half of game 4 against the Celtics and the first half of game 6 against the Celtics, maybe the second half of game 3 against the Pacers, like those are the only ones I would put up there with the first half the Knicks played against the Oklahoma City Thunder. It felt like they were optimized in every way. Tom Thibodeau, to your point, RIP, like exceptional game plan. And we could talk about the other end of the floor more in depth, but I thought just a brilliant move to really run the offense through Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, posting up the Thunder's wings. And again, Alex Caruso probably changes the equation a little bit there if he's not guarding Jalen Brunson. But the fact that J-Dub was, I believe, on Cat in that game. I know he certainly was in the second game, but I think he did start and play most of that game on Karl Anthony Towns. And they just said, all right, like we're going to brutalize some other matchups, and you're going to hide Isaiah Hartenstein in the corner on Josh Hart. That's great. OG Anunoby, you're going to put Lou Dort in the basket. Mikal Bridges, you're going to shoot fadeaways over Cason Wallace or whoever was guarding him. And the Knicks were really effective doing that in the early going. But the even bigger thing defensively was it was just far and away the best stretch of individual defense we saw Mikal Bridges play all season. I went back and looked at my notes. He held Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to a 6 for 16 start in that game, blocked him once on a drive to the rim, another play where he tracked SGA, walled him off perfectly, defended the pass, and then when he rose up to shoot, got a great contest and enforced like an up and down travel. Like I just didn't see too many defenders do that against SGA all year. OG Anunoby, whenever J-Dub was out of the game, he was just exceptional, playing free safety and like sprinting over from Lou Dort, covering ground in a way him and maybe 4 other people on planet Earth can, and finding a way to get a contest on a Shea shot where he wasn't even the primary defender. And Cat like held up really well on switches, and I wonder if that'll look the same and he'll look as good defensively as he did in that first game when Chet is back and he has to respect the pick and pop versus Hartenstein, where you could maybe switch that a little bit more comfortably. And Shea isn't like the pull-up three-point shooting threat that some of the other elite guards in the NBA are. And in some weird ways, that is like a relatively good matchup for Cat, with the caveat that SGA is like arguably the best scorer on planet Earth. Like I didn't think that was the end of the world for Cat making that switch and the Knicks applying a lot of help or playing in drop and daring SGA to beat you shooting pull-up threes. Again, I think that gets a little bit more complicated when you go from Hartenstein, who's a fantastic offensive player, to Chet, who is obviously just a much bigger threat as a scorer, and to your point, still has a lot of room to make another jump. But I do think there was an example last year of the Knicks like playing against the Thunder, maybe not at their best, but I still think Oklahoma City was in impressive form at that point, despite no Chet, despite no Caruso, and holding their ground pretty well. And then if you want, we could talk about the second game where none of that was true and Cat got torched and Mikal got torched, and you could say, all right, is that really sustainable for the next over 7 games? And it's totally fair if you want to argue that it's not.
Yeah, and can I give you an argument for why Knicks fans should still be encouraged this season? I think that you look at that, and we just acknowledged that Tom Thibodeau, excellent defensive mind. And even so, we're picking apart this New York defense heavily of how they defended Indiana and Boston and Oklahoma City and what they would have looked like defensively this season against these matchups. So the defensive mind that Tom Thibodeau was still didn't erase all their problems, but what did he neglect? The bench unit. And what helped Oklahoma City in the Mecca on that night where they won in the Garden? It was 31 points from Isaiah Joe.
I was going to
8
say,
for
I was
11.
going to ask you how much did he
8 for
outscore Mikal
11.
Bridges by, but it's clear you're looking at the box score. He outscored Mikal Bridges by 31 points in that game.
But guess what? The Thunder,
Yeah.
yes, the Thunder have depth, and yes, they have more depth than New York. There's no doubt about that. But they also have a willingness to turn to different guys, to say, hey, it's not your night, and that's all right. We're going to try to pick you up with the next man up. And that's something that fundamentally Tom Thibodeau just does not do, to where it's fair to be low on New York's depth right now, but I don't want you to be too low on New York's depth, because what happens when you get those guys chances? Isaiah Joe in Philadelphia never got chances. He was viewed upon as a terrible player. He gets to Oklahoma City, gets a ton of chances. He's viewed upon now as a sharpshooter who really helps your bench. And so with Mike Brown, what if he injects, someone else on this roster into a game who, yeah, maybe it's only five times a year where he comes in and scores 25 points, but it's 5 additive wins to your team that sets you up for success. And if they happen in the postseason with Ben Shepherd-like moments, it flips an entire postseason series and thus flips an entire postseason run. So the willingness that I expect New York to have to just simply try, guys who don't have a scouting report against them, guys who perhaps you're not respecting enough as a defense, that then you let them get hot, you let them get into a rhythm, and now they've turned a game over on its head in your favor. That difference is something that I can't let go unnoticed that New York can have this year, because that happens in the playoffs too. I mean, the rare times that Tom Thibodeau did try different players last year in the postseason, it seemed to work for New York, and it seemed to help them in games. Maybe not win all of them, but it seemed to help them in those games. And that's the same thing that Indiana did, same thing that Oklahoma City did, same thing that these teams that have gotten far in the playoffs have done. Denver, who didn't have a ton of depth to lean on, they didn't make it as far as Oklahoma City and Indiana, who were just willing to say, you know what? Let's just see what Thomas Bryant has tonight. Let's just see. Tom Thibodeau would have never played Thomas Bryant in a game ever, and people would have defended that because, well, at least you're playing your best 5 players. But Thomas Bryant helps you win a game, and that's helps you win a series. Isaiah Joe the same way, of like Tom Thibodeau would never play Isaiah Joe, and Isaiah Joe had 3 30-point nights last year, and in all those games the Thunder won. And so I think that the Knicks' willingness to play their roster and perhaps go through some growing pains, perhaps it's not perfect, but in preparation to have optionality in the postseason, helps you be a better team and helps you try to win a championship more than just grinding it all out for a regular season win.
To your point, that first game against the Thunder last year, all 5 Knicks starters play at least 40 minutes in regulation. It was the first time that had happened since 2013. Oh, sorry, it was the first time the Knicks had done that since 2013. And they were the only team at that point in the NBA season to have done it in the 24-25 season, which I didn't even mind it in that game because all those guys are playing so well. But you look at what happened in the fourth quarter of that game where the Knicks just completely fell apart and SGA started cooking them. Some of that had to be fatigue because they were just playing so incredibly hard in the first half. And to your point, this part wasn't Tom Thibodeau's fault. Like the Knicks legitimately did not have a very talented bench last year. And to your point, if those guys were empowered, like I think of someone like Landry Shamet, who finally got substantial minutes against the Pacers and looked incredible. It was arguably at times like seemingly their 4th best player, 5th best player in some of those games. So some of that's on Tom Thibodeau, but they have Jordan Clarkson this year. They have Gershon Yabusele, like guys who I like. Obviously, Clarkson is someone else that could be targeted defensively, and Yabusele is as well to some extent, but especially offensively, like given the ball hawks the Thunder have and the way they just make certain guards unplayable because they can't handle that level of pressure. I think Jordan Clarkson, from a talent perspective, is up to that. Whether he like makes good reads or he tries to be too aggressive or he tries to do too much and Oklahoma City trips him up that way, that is totally plausible. But from a talent perspective and his ability to shoot off the dribble, his ability to make advanced cross-court reads, the Knicks really lack that in terms of ball handling and playmaking outside of Jalen Brunson last year. So I think that'll be a big boost to them. And I think the fact that Yabusele is like another really high-level transition player, another high-level above the break three-point shooter, something that the Knicks didn't really have and really hurt their spacing outside of Deuce McBride and Jalen Brunson last year, I think makes the Knicks a little bit more formidable against Oklahoma City, and also gives Mike Brown, if he wants to use it, a little bit more optionality. Mitchell Robinson is another guy who, like, obviously not really on par with Chet Holmgren from an impact perspective, but clearly at times was maybe the Knicks' best player in the playoffs for 5-6 minute stretches. I do think Oklahoma City is less vulnerable to that particular archetype now that they ironically stole Isaiah Hartenstein from the Knicks because he is an excellent defensive rebounder. But if Chet and Mitch are on the floor at the same time, that is an opportunity for Mitchell Robinson to feast on the offensive glass. Unlike Karl Anthony Towns, he's someone you do trust guarding in space a little bit more, makes their defense a bit more flexible, a bit more feasible to play Jalen Brunson and still find ways to cover up for him. So I do think the Knicks just have more answers on their roster beyond how Mike Brown uses that roster. It's just going to be interesting to see if that combination of Caruso and Chet sends Oklahoma City so far ahead beyond the internal improvement that should be there for a team where essentially no one other than Shea was really in their prime last year. It is a scary thought for Knicks fans and NBA fans as a whole. But Rylan, unless you had any final thoughts, I wanted to give you the opportunity to just tell Knicks fans where they can find all your fantastic work going forward.
Yeah, you can check us out at Locked On Thunder, the same place you find Locked On Knicks, Thunder on SI as well. And also me and Gavin, like you mentioned, Locked On NBA Game Night Saturday nights. We're going to have you the entire NBA season and in the offseason as well. But Gavin, this was a lot of fun. Love talking about these two contenders.
Yeah, this was a blast, dude. We'll talk to you soon on both Locked On Knicks and Locked On Thunder.